Good morning. So this morning I was going to present Dairy Farmers of Canada ProAction initiative. It's a bit of an example of what the industry has done. I think one of the reasons we were invited is because I think in some ways the ProAction initiative goes beyond the regulatory requirements, and as a whole we decided to do this for the whole 12,000 producers. So Dairy Farmers of Canada is owned and run by the 12,000 dairy producers right across Canada. Today I'm an engineer, but I represent, and I'm staff, but I represent dairy farmers who are basically 47 years old, average age, works 365 days a year. You can never complain to dairy farmers how hard you work because they just laugh at you. And then, and they're usually multi-generational farm. Some of them have been there for 5 generations. They're family farm. They considered small and medium businesses. They have less than 10 employees. 75% of our farms in Canada are tie stalls. 25% are free stalls. 90% of Quebec farms, which is half our producers, are tie stalls. So, let's see here. Our industry is also has cash receipts of around a little bit less than $7 billion. We're a major player in the agricultural world. We like to think so anyway. We're either number 1 or number 2's commodity in 7 of the 10th province, and certainly number 1 in Ontario as milk and dairy, and the same in Quebec and BC. The 3 provinces that dairy is not either number 1, number 2, or the 3 western provinces where crops and certainly beef are much bigger. We also, a dairy farmer is a beef farmer. I like to mention this once in a while. And so we represent about 12% of the beef industry, 10 to 12% of the beef industry. So the questions that you have in your handout, or the statements, is with a changing landscape, new value-added opportunities are emerging. What kind of policies are needed to capture these opportunities? And so I decided, like my colleagues, to basically divide it in 3. And so with a changing landscape, what does that mean for us? Well, we have a greater percentage of foreign-born populations. Approximately 20% of our Canadians, citizens, were born in a different country than Canada. And with this, they bring different habits and different values. And a lot more and more of those foreign-born population are Asian, and they have different dietary needs and demands. 45% of our Canadians' urban population live in 6 largest cities, and 2/3 of the rural populations live close to these urban centers, which means that fewer people are familiar to some of the practices that are being done at the agricultural level, and certainly at the dairy. And then everyone is more and more demanding, and they want to know where their food comes from. Certainly, the landscape is changing for us. Canada's dairy production is increasing, but the demands for ingredients is changing. Now we have Time magazines that put in that we need more butter, so butter is becoming in style, asking for more butter fat. Yet we have shelves of yogurts now that we've never used to have. When I was young, we didn't know what yogurt was. And our palate for cheese, as our population is growing, is going towards much finer cheese. So this, again, is changing landscape that affects certainly both processing and production level. We also have customers that are getting questions and demands, and so when the consumer goes and picks up his bag of milk or his cheese, then the contract that he has is really with the retailers, and possibly using a brand from a processor. And so the relationship that they have is between the processor or the retailer and not necessarily to the farmer directly. And so these retailers and these processors are getting demands and they're getting questions about even farm practices. Where do they get their products? And of course, this comes to us because some of them are not as familiar with farming practices, but they're certainly getting accustomed and finding out in a hurry, especially when they're made accountable on the public forum. So with this, then our clients really are coming back to a list of inquiries that's changing. That's basically all of a sudden we're asked to prove what we do. And an example of this is, for example, Whole Foods that will have a steak where they will grade the steak and basically say 0, they don't know where this steak came from and they have no traceability. And trust me, they don't sell too many of that particular item at Whole Foods. But at 5, where they know how that particular animal that was taken care of, they know exactly which farm it came from, and they're able to trace. And so this brings a whole lot of challenges for us where we need to trace that animal, we need to prove what the practices were on the farm, and so that, it can get a value added, so that Whole Foods comfortable in the grading that they give. And then, of course, we also have today a certification overload where customers and agencies can make themselves the certifications and say, oh, we'll go and, for example, look at production and processing and we'll add a logo. And so now, for example, in the fish industry, Sobeys will accept some certifications of the way that the products was both fished and processed, but it's not the same certification that Loblaws. And so a fisherman now, if he wants to sell both to Loblaws and Sobeys, will need to have 2 different certifications. And so this brings an added load to our farming community. If we have more than 1 certification, that means we also have more than 1 auditors. And this becomes complicated. And so we're, as a farming community, we're trying to avoid this. We don't want to eliminate it. There's always going to be niche products, right? So, for example, organic milk, and those are very specific. But I think the consumer, when they're shopping and they're seeing all these logos, may not mean necessarily something to them. And it becomes overbearing. We also have to remind ourselves that, the regulations for a farmer hasn't changed, and in fact, some cases are increasing. And here I'm showing you a slide where we have 50 regulations here right from Ontario, and this is at the provincial level. And farmers have to deal, for example, with the Beef Cattle Marketing Act, the Trespass Act, the Occupational Health and Safety, the Farm Products, the Milk Act, the Well Act. And so this becomes overbearing sometimes on a small and medium-sized business. And this hasn't changed, and it's not getting any better. And we need to be very well aware that really, the paperwork and the demands that our municipal, federal, and provincial governments are asking are not making farmers money. They make money when they're in the field and in the barn. So, is a handshake good enough today? Is just saying that we do the practices and trust us? And what about the social license? Is now we need another sort of communications, and the answer is obviously yes. I come from an industry that they'll buy a combine or for a few $100,000 and just by shaking hands, but less and less this is true, and people want to prove to you, and they want paperwork and the paper trail, and they want contracts and licenses. So in this view, then, we dairy farmers basically decided to put a program together called ProAction, which we registered this trademark. But really, this is intended for the industry. It's not intended for the consumer, or we're not going to see on packages ProAction. But this was a way that we want to go in and put a plan in place to provide assurance to our customers about what we do. And we wanted to build on the existing infrastructure, but start regrouping some of the audits. We didn't want to have 5 different audits. We wanted to have one on the farm. And we wanted to be able to put a minimum level for all dairy producers in Canada so that we'd be right at the same stage and right at the same understanding. Milk is a commodity that gets commingled, and so if you're going to start to have niche products, then you have to basically only pick up milk every second day from those producers that are going to adhere to certain levels, and that becomes really impractical. So milk, perhaps from that farm products, is perhaps challenging to have a niche product. So by doing a minimum standard, as we're commingling milk between provinces, this becomes easier. Now, what we did is basically, for us, ProAction means milk quality, and that includes inspections, the regulatory side of things, and then all the regulatory testing that's being done. Food safety, which we call it the Canadian Quality Milk Program. Food safety is, of course, a risk-managed assessment that's being done on farms and using the HACCP principle, a little bit like the ISO 9001. And then on top of this, we're going with traceability, so every animal gets tagged. We do this on something like 85% of the farms already, but when they get born. But now we want to do this for 100% of the farms. Certainly, milk traceability is there at 100%, but here we're talking about livestock traceability. We want to talk about animal care, and so basically go and assess individual cows and animals, and then on a tag basis to see how they're doing so that we can assess every single farm where they rate between one another so that we can continuously improve. Biosecurity, that's trying to contain contagious diseases, and of course the environment and the sustainability and some of the life cycle analysis that we do. This is on our website. I'm not going to spend much more time. We can do it in the questions, but this is really our program. Now, this is all about trust, and so how did we do this, and how do we become transparent? Well, we put this timelines, a 10-year plan. We'll show you a diagram a little bit later. And so it started in 2013. So in 2023, we'll be 100% audited. Our producers or our farmers do this already, but this is going to be an assurance that we're going to go and audit every single farm every second year, at least once every 2 years. We want to use existing infrastructures and framework. We want to be completely transparent. We're not expecting that everything we're going to find on farms are going to be excellent. We think, in fact, some of the things that we're going to report are going to be maybe embarrassing in some case, but what we are committed to is basically continuously improve. And certainly being transparent, and so that with the public, the journey starts. And then we want to be able to communicate about it. So this is our timelines for the 6 elements over the 10-year period. And so now the second part of the first statement is the new value-added opportunities are emerging. Now, when you look at farmers, you see the way that the Canadians trust the professionals. You see that they're very highly rated, and for us, we look this as an opportunity. Farmers are rated after nurses and doctors as a profession, very high. Unfortunately, it's even higher than engineers, as you can see. And then you go accountants, journalists, actors, lawyers, and of course you get politicians at the very bottom. I took off used car salesmen because it was higher than politicians, worse than politicians. Now a dairy farmer looked at this and said, did you notice that as the trust factors goes down, the more money these professionals make? And I didn't know what to answer to that. Certainly, farmers are being looked upon again and as trust. We see that at Great Britain for farmers, they went down a little bit, and I think in view of some of the, especially in 2012 when that survey was taken, Great Britain was having some of their biosecurity issues, which really was devastating to their farming industry. And I think trust took a hit there. But the other thing too that the public and the society looks at our farms, they either look at them as an agrarian farm where, you know, farmers are doing this as a way of life and they know cows by name and et cetera, or as a industrial farm. You know, the farms are basically, it's only money, there's no feelings, farmers don't care, all they care about is money. And there's a third way that Dr. Fraser from the University of British Columbia suggested, and it's basically to do dairy farming as a profession. And, you know, in dairy farming is a very regulated industry. You need to be provincially licensed and regulated. Since you have milk contact surfaces, there's inspections, regulatory inspections that's being done every year, every second year. And so basically this is where it comes and it makes it I think there's some values for the farmers that are already used to get visited by regulators. But now we want to go a step further and have ethicals and values to have responsibilities towards the public, towards animals, towards environment, towards customers, employees, and other dairy farmers. And this is becomes really just like a professional, just like engineering or doctors, where, for example, if you're going to judge another doctor, you take a doctor that will have a panel of doctors that will evaluate another doctor. Same idea here, and so a doctor would never be evaluated by an engineer, or certainly not by the drug companies. They will be evaluated by a panel of the college or the order. Same idea here with a dairy farmer. We want to put this program together so that it's a farmer evaluate farmers. And I'm telling you, they're the toughest judges. And doing this, we want to have it mandatory for all dairy farms as a minimum requirements to dairy farm in this country. So let me give you a few examples here. The first example is and I got to run, I'm seeing that I'm going a bit on my time, but you're okay. So the first example is milk quality. When we're looking at the average somatic cell count, we did very well, but Canada had, and I'm not going to go in somatic cell count and what it is, but basically very quickly it's, you know, white blood cells that gets evaluated in milk. It's something that we use and it's very common in the dairy world. Not just in Canada, and we do millions, literally millions of samples of either cows or bulk tanks or trucks that gets evaluated on somatic cell count. So it's an important way of doing the other health on the farm. So anyway, the regulatory limit in the U.S. is 750,000. They try to bring it down for many, many years, but they can never agree to this, so it's still 750,000. In Canada, it's 500. It was 500,000. But the DFC, Dairy Farmers of Canada, decided to self-impose a limit in 2013, got it voted down, put it through, and it came to 400,000. And we can see the difference between 2014 and 2011 here, that it did improve by basically 10% of the average somatic cell count. And this, again, is an example of the industry taking initiative and doing this on its own way before regulatory imposed. Another example is food safety. We decided to, use the HACCP principle and then put this on 100% of our farms. So we have 75 validators, independent validators, that goes across Canada and evaluate every single farm at least once every 2 years. And This was it was a project. Yes, we do, and then and there was an investment that was done, for example, for time temperature recorders, and the time temperature recorder that you see at the bottom right was a device for monitoring milk quality, and that particular device was a $30 million investment for farmers, and this is mandatory in some of the provinces, and that didn't give them any more milk. So the third example, if you want to stay there, Cam, this is the time to go on the internet. So another example that we have is this infrastructure, which basically cows get evaluated according to breeds and according to traits that they have, and it's one of the, I think, the highlights that we have in the Canadian dairy industry. We have Holstein Canada, for example, that goes evaluate farms at least every 7 months, and they will evaluate every single first lactation cow. And part of this is you can see in the drawings there that how they rate and how they compare to the ideal cow in Canada. Now, part of this too is we have other organizations that goes at least once a month for the Canadian. Thank you, it's working. Let's say DHI, Dairy Herd Management, and they goes and take a sample of the milk to see how much production it gives, to basically assumes what the curve is going to be, and everything is in that particular website, and it's cdn.ca, and you can go and basically see for yourself. You put any cow's name and you'll get something, I assure you. So here's an example of Summer Shade Ellie Brooks. You could also put the tag number and then you get this. So Cam, let's go and see the sire of that particular. So you can go back to in history, and if you click on the sire, you see that this was born in 2004. I can't not really see. Click. Did it work? And then just keep clicking. Let's see if I can read it. And you see that, for example, you can go back in time and see the sires of the sire and the grandfather of the grandfather, et cetera, and I think we tried it a little bit earlier, and we went to 1920s of these particulars. So we have this in our framework already being judged, and all this right into a computer. So for us to do this, when we want to evaluate, for example, the well-being of a cow, this is going to be fairly simple to just add those, because we're going to be able to do 260,000 cows a year that's going to be evaluated, which is about a quarter of all cows in Canada. And that's going to be into the CDN website that's available to everybody in the world. So the fourth case study that I want to talk to you about is the Environment Farm Plan and the life cycle analysis. 80% of our producers have done an Environment Farm Plan, and then we want basically to ask 100% of them to do an Environment Farm Plan. We also did a life cycle analysis, and we saw that, for example, 1 liter of milk is basically 1 kilogram of CO2 produced, and then the carbon footprint, as we see, at the bottom right there, Canada is doing well in terms of when we're comparing to ourselves in the world, and about 20 liters of water is needed to produce 1 liter of milk. This again is an assessment that's being done, and then we'll be able to monitor ourselves in the future as we come back and basically benchmark. So what kind of policies do we need? I've got 3 of them. Keep supply management. I'm told this is a very popular topic here. So facilities, I don't know. I think supply management gives the relationship between farmers and the consumer in a very special way. And I think this was really a driver that was able to help us to go for 100% compliance. We did develop through time a strong infrastructure. We have farmer engagements like nowhere before, I think, in no other industry. I'm very proud of this. and that we go beyond regulation. ProAction initiative is going to require $200 million investment over 10 years, both cash and in kind, and this is quite a bit of investment, and it comes from the producer's pocket. Not everything gets reimbursed here. And then Canadians support and want Canadian milk because they trust the quality. The second thing that we'd like to talk about is that to have uniform provincial national requirements and recognition. We need collaboration between provincial and national regulators. So what we'd like is to have regulations that's uniform right across Canada. The dairy products, dairy regulations is very old and changes from one province to another. And so because importers are going to use the lowest denominator, we really like to have, for example, uniformity. And we need government to be third-party auditors for our modules, because they are going to be really the sense and our public defender of what we do. And they're a good third-party, unbiased a judge of what we do. And we need growing forward, too, to maintain the market assurance programs. And we also want environmental farm plans to be maintained. Finally, we have preoccupations related to trade. I'm not the trade expert here, but I think, for example, I wanted to use RBST, which is the recombinant bovine somatropin, or bovine growth hormone, that is banned in Canada but allowed in the U.S. And this, as you may or may not know, is not a health issue. So for example, Health Canada did not refuse milk that comes from the U.S. based on the health preoccupations for the humans. The reason that Health Canada said no to RBST was because it was a preoccupations on the well-being of animals. Because when you're putting RBST, the longevity of the cow is not as long. She tends to have more disease. Dairy Farmers of Canada supports the Health Canada stand. But if with those trade negotiations that milk is being allowed to come into Canada, then it puts us into a preoccupations where, for example, we don't know, like it's harder to compete. I mean, if you allowed RBST to be used in Canada, farmers would have done it. So again, we're not we stand by Health Canada, but this really became onto a well-being of cows, and which again we support. But if this is the case, then we want the rules to be the same. And so in the same vein, labeling becomes important, and then certainly if we have to trace our animals, we certainly want the same type of equivalency. Again, I want to thank you for allowing me to come, and went a little bit over my time. Sorry about that, but hopefully we'll have time for questions.